Hello and welcome everybody to the Poker Fuse podcast. This is episode 12 coming at you on April 25th, 2019. I'm your host, Mike Gentili, along with my co-host, Nick Jones. Nick, how's it going today?
It is going very good. It's very good indeed. We just get this out of the way early on. We skipped a week again, didn't we? That happened.
Yeah. I was definitely under the weather last week, so that was a contributing factor. I guess the good thing is that means we have a lot of things to cover this week.
Yeah, it's going to be another one. Hopefully, we'll keep this under the hour. Although our last episode was our most listened to date by quite a long shot. So seeing some.
Was it the longest as well?
It was the longest. There is, okay. If we were to graph it, there will be very much a trend line between length and listenership. So maybe if we bang on for like 3 hours, we'll go viral or something.
There are some that go on a lot longer than that. So there's got to be a point of diminishing returns at some juncture. But if listeners have a preference as to the length, definitely would like to hear that. So tweet at us. I am at SpookyBugs, and Nick, you are?
I am Poker Pro Jones. So yeah, let us know how we are doing, please. And meanwhile, we will just dive into the week's news.
It seems like there is a trending topic in online poker these days with the reduction of the use of third-party tools. We saw that Party Poker has not officially announced, but we've gathered from multiple sources that HUDs are going away on Party Poker, as well as tracking software. Nick, what can you tell us more about what we know at this point, having not had any real official communication yet?
Yeah, so I think probably if we looked at all the topics we talked about in our 11, 12 episodes that we've recorded, this is probably the most consistent. We definitely even talked about PokerStars policy on this. So absolutely kind of 2019 has been defined so far by operators' approaches to whether players are allowed to use kind of third-party tools when they play online poker. And I think we probably talked in the last month or two about Party Poker moving towards kind of reducing or restricting quite significantly what players can do. And it does seem very much like next month that they will ban all HUDs, all automated seating scripts. We thought initially all third-party tools entirely, although a more recent statement says it's going to be very restricted what third-party tools will be allowed. We are in direct communications with Party Poker. We do expect to get like an official statement from them very soon, but as it stands now, they have communicated to their customers on their Discord channel on social media that this is coming in May. So we expect to see a ban on HUDs. All players are apparently going to be forced to change their screen name as a one-time thing. So everyone kind of is reset to a baseline anonymity. And
let me ask you on that, Nick, because that was something I wasn't sure of, if they would have the option of changing their screen name or if they're going to be mandated to do so.
Well, my interpretation of what they said is this will be like one day you will log in and it will say set a new screen name and you will type one in. Wow. The implication is it's going to be mandated, but we'll see. I say nothing is entirely concrete right now. So a lot of this came through Rob Young, who spoke on a couple of gave one interview a month or two back, and then did a video podcast with
Jeff Gross.
with Jeff Gross, the recent Party Poker ambassador, and he talked pretty freely about that this was going to happen. But Rob talks about quite a lot of things in quite free-form sense, so that was never clear. This seems much more clear-cut that this will be happening next month. But well, hopefully in a week's time this will be much clearer, and we hope to have a specific date and the exact kind of parameters of what party will be implementing.
Yeah, so the idea behind the screen name change, just to get back on that topic a minute, is to obfuscate your playing history, as far as I understand it. So they are going to be removing downloadable hand histories, and that seems like a direct hit against players that are using tracking software. And it seems like the change in the forced name and change of screen names is also to facilitate that initiative.
Yeah, so I guess the way I would look at it is that, on the day this applied, you'll not be able to use a HUD, so you won't be able to bring up your historical play statistics against a player. And yeah, they're preventing hand history downloads. There's going to be a new hand history replayer, so you can replay hands in the client, but any future play that you have against an opponent, you won't be able to gather data on. However, of course, if they didn't if they didn't force everyone to do a screen name change, then historical data that somebody might have either observed and have that data on, or in theory illicitly purchased these hand histories, if players still had the same screen name, people could manually go into their tracking software and look up players and still work out if tables were filled with recreational casual players based on their historic play style, although that history won't be extended into the future. So kind of the forced screen name change wipes the slates clean. So any previous play in addition to future play will be wiped clean, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting move. It's definitely a trend that we have seen, I mean, for years now, back with the recreational player model that was put out by Bodog back, what was that, 2011? I think that was right around Black Friday.
Yeah, we're definitely looking 6-7 years ago. Unibet software was probably the biggest kind of European regulated site to implement that, and that was 5+ years ago now. So yeah, it's not like we're saying this is the trend of 2019. Absolutely, if you teleported back 2 or 3 years and we had a podcast, we would be saying absolutely this is the trend, because there's definitely been this move towards that. But and we talked, I think, probably 2 weeks ago about PokerStars and their banning of all automated seating scripts. So they haven't gone as far as HUDs and tracking tools, at least not yet. So the big two operators in the last 3 months have taken large strides in reducing the usage of these tools.
Yeah, from my perspective, it will be interesting to see if this is really the beginning of the bigger operators jumping on board and doing whatever they can to reduce the use of third-party tools in online poker in general.
Yeah, at least in my opinion. We're also seeing this conversation happening with Run It Once Poker, which obviously launched with fully anonymous names. Every time you sit down at a table, your screen name is changed. No HUDs, no trackers, no nothing really. And players having mixed opinions on that. I think it's one of those things that in my opinion, definitely automated seating scripts. It was insane to me that these were allowed for such a long time because they basically confer such an advantage. In my mind, back when I used to play professionally, I did this and I did this very well. And one of the biggest skills that I brought, for myself was using these tools, either manually or automatically, finding the best tables and finding the best seats quicker than other people. But no one wants online poker to be that. That should never be where you extract your skill out. So it's insane that they existed for the longest time. I can absolutely see an argument for why HUDs shouldn't exist. I don't like the idea of anonymous tables. I think it removes any player
social aspect.
A social aspect, and just identifying the weaker players is an aspect of poker going back to pre-internet. I mean, that just was finding the good games and sitting in them was absolutely part of the experience. And you do lose a part of the experience sitting down and just having 6 random names that even if you're playing across multiple tables, you won't be able to know that it's the same player across multiple tables. You won't be able to know, you sit down tomorrow and whether it's the same people or not. So I see kind of the anonymous table scene quite distinct from the other aspects, and it'll be interesting to see if the industry continues in this direction. I think there'll be an opportunity for an online poker room going allow, use your real names, and that being their kind of standout feature, because I think it is an enjoyable aspect. I think for a casual player, it's an enjoyable aspect. You hold grudges against regular opponents. You avoid certain players. You don't want to sit on the direct right or direct left of certain players. It's a social important part of the game that I think is lost when you go fully anonymous. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good points on both sides of the third-party tools arguments. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. One of the more exciting things to happen to online poker in recent time is the implementation of Aurora by PokerStars. For those of you that don't know, Aurora is the new game engine. Do I have that right, Nick? Yeah. I'm not quite clear on the different names that they have behind the different components.
Yeah, I'd say game engine is fine.
Yeah, and what that is allowing PokerStars to do is to implement enhanced features, visual and audio, so you can see animations. There will be new sound effects. There will be new, and it's weird saying that there will be new interactive elements, such as I think like cigars at the table and stuff, because those were elements that were present back. Paradise Poker back in the day was famous for ordering drinks for your friends or getting something delivered to the table. So it sounds weird that is being pushed as something new, but it has been something that has been absent from the major online poker rooms for quite a while. Yeah,
so it's an interesting story. So it's definitely, on one hand, it's kind of it's a very geeky or perhaps insider kind of story, because from the user's perspective, initially when they play PokerStars and they have the new Aurora engine, which we'd probably stay up front, is very slowly rolling out to market. It's actually been live in Portugal for real money for like 2 or 3 months. It's been live in the .NET client for 4 months. We actually wrote about it back in December, and I think it's just gone live in Estonia. I think in the next few months it'll be live in other markets. But ultimately, when you do start playing with this new engine, you probably won't notice any significant difference, and that's obviously by design. It's something that PokerStars wants to do. They want to make it nearly invisible, we were told in an interview we did this week. But kind of behind the scenes, PokerStars is completely changing how they are developing their online poker software. So they're using kind of a newer generation 2D game engine, which allows them to develop the product much faster. And we'll see in like iteration 1 is that a lot of the table themes have changed, some of them quite subtly, some of them much more dramatically. So some of the themes that aren't really used that much today, the old classic theme and the saloon theme, have been completely overhauled. And I think they've experimented a bit more with some of the new kind of animations and sound effects that to me just kind of feels a bit more modern ultimately. But the themes that most people use, like the black theme, and I think it's called Mercury, that's it. I think that's the default theme now. The changes there are actually very, very subtle. But what was interesting is we wrote these stories and published them across our sites this week, and readers have been. It's one of our most read stories in the last 3 months. Is this article? So it certainly hit. I wouldn't say hit a nerve, but it's certainly been.
Something of interest.
Something really of interest, and I think that just goes to speak to, I don't know, how people are intimately familiar with their online poker software. I mean, whenever someone updates their online poker software, mostly response is negative. I think from the high volume players, because if you're a professional player, you play on a client for hours and hours at a time, and it's like when anyone, Microsoft updates their operating system, or Microsoft Word or Gmail has an interface update, everyone just instantly hates it because you get used to what it is. So,
and you have to change your processes. That's a big thing for professional players too.
But so I think what's worth stressing is that PokerStars, I think, realize this and want that. They want to introduce this without having that upheaval, but then it will give them the ability to incrementally improve the product, launch new features. So we're seeing Power Up, their game that already uses this new engine, so they've been using it for the last few years, specifically with Power Up. And you can see with Power Up the effects, the animations, the sounds just feel next generation.
Yeah, one of the subtle differences, I mean super subtle, but for me it was really it really demonstrates the difference. If you go over to F5 Poker, we have a post up there that compares the beginning of spin and goes. And so for those not familiar, when you register for spin and go, there's a variable prize pool and there's a spinner. And there's one up there with the old spinner and one with the new spinner. And if you look closely, you definitely see the difference. It's there. It's subtle, but it's there. But I think that really goes to show the difference between the old game engine and the new game engine and what we can expect to see as far as animations and graphics going forward.
Yeah, I think animation is a big one. I've always said, for years and years and years, two things. All online poker software sucks. Has done for a very long time. It just the development cycles are excruciatingly slow compared to kind of modern rapid application development. The software feels like it's out of the 90s in a lot of cases, from like an Excel spreadsheet list of tables on the lobby as your default experience to, I don't know, just tables feeling janky and slow and laggy is I don't know, a word they use to try and just explain just that they don't feel responsive or exciting or engaging compared with I don't know, modern, particularly like a mobile application development today in new games. And just the development cycles are so slow that it will look at, I don't know, 888's Poker 8 client, you know, or Run It Once's Poker client, which is in development for years and still doesn't have some kind of core features, is that it just has been in, I don't know, apparently a key part of the industry. So seeing PokerStars, I think, take this step, and what they've done so far, I think, is very good. Those subtle animation changes really can make a game feel responsive and engaging rather than unresponsive and impersonal and cold. And it's something that I think Full Tilt Poker is, you know, still is one of the best for. The old software, which no longer exists, they managed to really nail that responsive feeling that I think sites still strive for today. So I can only see this as a good set. And I will say, because I mentioned Run It Once, I feel their software gets it as well. Like, that just feels good. And just feels responsive. And I'm hoping this new PokerStars one from our limited playtesting definitely seems to be a good step in that direction.
So I'm really excited to see phase 2, the second iteration. I want to see how they're able to integrate elements with the online poker playing experience. So there's talk of adding features or different elements to, for example, the buy-in screen of tournaments or the results, or I believe Severin had talked about perhaps even integrating PokerStars School into the client. And in my mind, I went back and I thought about, you know, what Party Poker recently did with their descriptions of your playing style.
Yeah.
That are personalized. So if you take that concept and then the integration of graphics and animation, and that to me is the exciting next step that I'm looking for in online poker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say something else is I hope that this can be used for like the integration of casino games or sports betting as well, because this absolutely staggers me in online poker clients that almost always there's, you know, casino sports betting integrated into the client, but you click on a casino button or the sports betting tab and basically a web page is loaded in the window. Like, it's unbelievably slow and just it immediately feels naff is the word. Just so poorly integrated, like it was just done offhand. So, funnily enough, I criticised 888 a few weeks back because their casino integration, their widgets were too good and they were really, really slick. You're at the poker table and you click casino and you get a side widget where you can play blackjack, like basically at the poker table. So that maybe was a step too far just because it took up so much real estate. But I think there's a good middle ground there, absolutely. And maybe this product can be used for that as well, because right now I think PokerStars is, at least in my experience in the UK, obviously this could be different in different markets, but the integration level is very poor cross vertical. So there's a big opportunity there. So obviously something that PokerStars is trying to encourage as much as possible is, you know, cross pollination of their gaming verticals. That there seems to be lots of opportunity for improvement there as well.
Yeah, we talked a lot about how, or I should say, you just talked a lot about how the online poker software in general seems to lag behind other gaming software that's out there in look and feel. And I'm curious, do you have any ideas as to why that's happening? I mean, personally, from my perspective, I can understand why changes to existing software might be slower, because it feels like there's so much at risk. Because if you screw up something, you're talking about running real money online poker worldwide that is down for a while. But when it comes to new developments, such as a new client or a new online poker room launching, I guess I'm curious as to why it's behind the curve.
I mean, there could be lots of factors. I mean, one can just be inertia, because for the longest time, poker, grew and grew and grew and grew with little to no effort and investment in product, because it was under such demand. And it's only in the last few years that hasn't been the case. Obviously, with like real money poker, there are hoops to jump through, regulatory issues, particularly if you're live in a dozen markets. You have to every regulator wants to see a specific rule about how a buy-in box, says certain things, or there's responsible gaming, which I'm not saying is not important, but each one has a different thing. So that can absolutely slow down development. Maybe there is even fear of breaking support of third-party tools, which we know, like a few years ago, was important for an online poker room to have poker tracker support and things like that. And again, we touched on at the start about how, your high-volume player base will resist certain changes because they're used to a certain interface. So they can all, I think a lot of those reasons don't exist anymore. So what we're just left is kind of inertia. I mean, we saw MPN rewrote their online poker client almost from scratch in like a 9-month period. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Relax Gaming developed Unibet's online poker client from scratch in a year. So it can be done. Absolutely. So the more we can see the industry moving in that direction, the better, certainly.
One other thing that I want to ask you about, you just touched on, was the breaking of support for third-party tools. There's been some reports that where Aurora has been rolled out, that maybe tracking software is not working any longer. And I saw through some of the images that we had posted that it seems like the seating around the table is different from the pre-Aurora. Is that correct? Like where your own... and I'm going back a ways, but I remember that you would be able to select where your seat is around the table. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the difficulties of the tracking software.
So I think you can still have a set seat. So I think seat positions should be the same, but you're right in that absolutely what we've heard reports of from Portugal, where it's live for real money, is that the HUD software does not support the new Aurora tables at all. And so Portuguese players have basically been playing HUD lists for the last 2 or 3 months. Now, my assumption there is just that the third-party software developers have not had the impetus to support this, which you can understand, because if it's still in trial, you don't want to go and develop for a new software platform that might be changing. But and I believe that the way that third-party tools hook in to PokerStars is quite complex. I don't think it's just kind of a rudimentary kind of screen scraping. I think they actually hook into the messages that are sent. I'm going back a few years when I used to do some of this, but I think it hooks into kind of the Windows API calls of all the network traffic of the poker tables. So there are 3 possibilities. What I've read from the Portuguese community is that this is a fact. There'll be no HUDs on the new Aurora client. We're going HUDless. That's a fact, which I'd be surprised. Certainly PokerStars hasn't ever said to us or publicly at all that that's one of the design goals here. So I would be surprised if this is just collateral damage by accident and is just continues that way. With that said, it could be much harder for the third-party tools to support this new client, and if PokerStars is not working directly with them, then that could be nothing. Or it might just be, I think still the most likely scenario is that they haven't got around to making the necessary tweaks to support it. So there's definitely kind of watch this space and see if and hopefully we've reached out to Poker Tracker and Holder Manager to get their take on it. So hopefully we'll get an update there in the future. But yeah, I would be surprised if this starts to roll out globally that we don't see kind of first party support from the tracking tools.
And so from the images that I saw, it looked like, so it looks like the players are in different positions, old table, new table. Is that like just visually balancing so that you don't have like head-to-head players sitting right next to each other on the left side of the table now? And if that does change, that could have implications as to, for example, how HUDs work.
Well, it's interesting. So what we've got, which you can play around with on PokerViews, and you can see animations of on F5, is that we've got this cool, and we use it for previous articles, where you can move a slider and move between the old version and the new version, so you can quickly switch and see what's changed. So what you're describing there, Mike, is when I created these screenshots, conveniently, Portugal and Spain share the same player pool, but Portugal is on the new client and Spain isn't. So I loaded up both clients and observed tables. So I've got screenshots of exactly the same situation, one in Spain and one in Portugal, one on Legacy, one on Aurora. What's bizarre is when I observe, say, a Zoom table, both clients bring up the same table, but the players are shifted clockwise by 2 spaces on Portugal to Spain. The seat positions are the same, but the whole thing's being rotated by 2 pips. I don't know if it's randomized when you bring up a table observation, or whether for some reason Portugal is shifted around. But so the seat positions are the same. So I don't think they've moved. Like, it's not they've all shifted a couple of degrees. It's just that my observed Portuguese tables is the player is in a sitting in a different place. They're obviously all in the same position, but just rotated.
So they're not trying to visually balance anything. That's just perhaps the difference between the two clients.
I mean, so I'm just looking at our sliders now. So definitely on the classic theme, the seat positions are the same. They're just moved around. Whereas actually on the saloon theme, the positions have changed. So they're more. There's none directly up and down. They're more offset. So that theme has changed. But I think broadly speaking, we can say that there's nothing significant that's changed in terms of seat positions. I think it's just more a artifact of my screenshotting.
I see. Well, regardless of what has changed and what hasn't, I expect we will see more. More players will be getting to experience Aurora in the coming weeks and months. When is this planned to be fully rolled out?
Yes.
Nick?
So Severin cautioned to us that absolutely they're giving themselves no timetable. They said one of the good things about this is they can roll this out as slowly as they like. The current legacy client is perfectly fine. This is just a bit better. So with that said, he said they might be targeting kind of Q3. They would have fully retired the legacy client, which if they're aiming for that, you would expect it to be fully deployed by the end of Q2, I guess.
Right, yeah.
So
end of the summer.
Yeah, so it is live for real money in Portugal, so that's the European shared player pool, and Estonia, so that's the first kind of .com liquidity pool. So that obviously impacts more things because you have more game variance and that kind of thing. So I would imagine this side of Scoop will see it on a couple of bigger licensees, like Denmark and Sweden, something like that. So it's kind of keep your eyes on the tables and expect to have it in the next few months, whether you want it or not. So, Mike, what do you know that there are 200 billion of?
Yeah, 200 billion. Not yet, but there soon will be 200 billion hands dealt by PokerStars, which is just an astronomical number. They are celebrating this event as they have in the past with previous milestone hands, as they refer to them. This time they're putting up over $1 million as part of the celebration to be given out in promotions. That is currently ongoing. And I think one of the interesting aspects of this is when you think about 200 billion hands, how did we get here? And I think that was something that you wrote on in depth in Poker Industry Pro.
Yeah, so it's It's funny that, so their milestone hand promotions, they made a huge deal of when they got to 100 billion hands, which was, I'm just going to check my dates here, end of 2013. So they run like a multi-year promotion building up to it. I think it properly kicked in at the 60 billion hand mark, where they had this road to 100 billion. And like, so 60...
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
That was a while.
And it was a big deal. And it was every 5 or 10 billion, which occurred every 3 to 6 months. They would have this big promotion. And they would have this big milestone hand counter. So every time a hand is dealt, obviously the counter goes up one. And if you get dealt into, a round number, so I can't remember, every 100,000th hand or something like that, the table would get a prize. And this caused huge spikes in traffic. I think initially it crashed the server because so many people flooded to it. PokerStars came up with this idea of the milestone hands. It's since been used by other operators. Winamax still does it. They count their hands, and again they get 30-40% traffic spikes. Really popular with players. And then obviously the million hands, you get even bigger prize than if you're in the actual 60 billionth hand, 70 billionth hand, tens or hundreds of thousands is given out in prize money. And they used to pause the table when it got there and there'd be effects, and Lee Jones would come into chat and tell people, you're going to win all this money. They made this really big thing. It was a massive deal. 100 billion hands happened in 2013, and then that was it. Until now, they never really talked about milestone hands again.
Wow, that's a long period of time, 6 years in between, because even... And was there milestone hands before the 100 billionth? It feels like that's been a tradition at PokerStars for a while.
Yeah, so they had, starting at 60 billion, they had it every 5 or 10, but it was called the Road to 100 billion. But they celebrated it. But I think even before that, they did have a 50 and a 40 and a 25, and I think a 10 billion and a 5 billion, way back in, we're talking UGEAR time, and they did celebrate. So ever since, I can't remember what they did at the 5 billion. The big counter cash giveaway thing was in the 40 billion plus mark. So they celebrated over a dozen times over a period of 6 years, and then they've done nothing in the last 6 years.
It's surprising because I do remember it being very successful, but obviously they have data that we are not privy to, so perhaps there were things that were more successful at promoting and getting people to the tables.
And what we're also seeing here at the 200 billion is the way they are celebrating this is very different. As you say, you can remember the 100 billion hands. They were big deals. This, I'm going to say, does not seem like a big deal yet, at least. I mean, they've got, we think it's going to hit the 1st of May or very close to it. So we're a week out, something like that, at the time of recording. But as it stands right now, I would not say there's significant buzz around them hitting this milestone like there was previous time.
Yeah, and one of the things to understand is 200 billion hands. Well, I mean, that number is just almost so large it's hard to wrap your head around. And how did we get here?
Yeah, so one thing that we did, which is fun, and I don't know, part of me thinks maybe one of the reasons they stopped doing this is it gives us a very good insight into how frequently they're dealing poker hands. And so obviously we jumped at this opportunity and plotted a big graph, which is on Poker Industry Pro if you're a subscriber. I think I tweeted about it as well, so have a look on Twitter if you're interested in the nerdy stats. But obviously you can plot a nice time series graph on the x-axis of when all these milestones is hit, and on the y-axis, the milestones.
Number of hands.
And what is fascinating is, obviously, we have this 6-year gap, but the rate that PokerStars has been dealing hands from a period of, I think, 2012 to 2016, where we had all the milestones, to 2013 when we had all the milestones, to the last 6 years, is the rate they've been dealing hands has been almost constant. It's pretty much a straight line from the 40 billion to the 200 billion hands. That is a rate of hand dealing. Let me just bring up the numbers. So they deal about 17.5 billion hands a year, which works out at just under 40 million a day, which is, maths getting easier now, 2 million hands an hour. Every hour of the day. But what's incredible is that the last 6 years they've been doing that rate, which is the same rate as kind of the the 4 years prior to that, which might surprise some, given that, I mean, just so much has happened in that time period. We're talking about a period which includes like the United States withdrawing from the market. This is how much, how broad this time frame is. And then much smaller events like Australia withdrawing, but also very positive events for the poker industry, like Zoom Poker, lottery sit and goes, just generally like the growth in tournaments and sit and goes, and mobile gaming didn't really exist kind of at the start of this graph. So all these things has happened, and PokerStars has been extremely consistent dealing these hands.
So looking at some of the math that you did, a couple of questions is, do we know what that breaks out to from a revenue perspective per hand? We're at 2 million hands an hour. How much does PokerStars bring in per hand? And then my part two of that question would be, projecting forward, when are we going to get to 1 trillion hands?
We could leave both of those questions as an exercise to the reader. You're absolutely right. That first, both of those could be done. That first question, you'd have to divide one number by the other. The second one, so if we're saying that they do 17 billion a year, then
that's a long time before we get to
it's still a long time. And so interestingly, I did see after I tweeted about this earlier this week, Game Intel that tracks cash game hands across the industry said that. So I did say, a big caveat in this data is that we have this gap in this chart of 6 years, and so we don't know within that whether it's it actually is a straight line or whether it actually fluctuates a lot. And they said according to their data, it definitely increased initially and has now flattened out somewhat. And and they said that's due to fast fold poker caused an increase in the rate of hand dealing initially at the start of this period. So 2014, 2015, that has slowed, and in fact, the rate is actually slower than it's been. So they said that the 300 billion will take longer than to reach than like the last 100 billion has happened, which might be the case. If PokerStars continues and celebrates the 250 billion, we'll certainly be able to add a plot to this graph and find out. That is the trumpet sound for Mike taking over the podcast and educating us all about the United States and what's happening in online gaming and online poker regulation in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, well, the biggest news has been that Pennsylvania has set a go live period date, however you want to look at that, and that is going to be July 15th. So their online gaming market will launch during that week. From what we know, there will be and they haven't called it such, but there will be a soft launch period, very similar to what we saw in New Jersey. I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, but I can recall that in New Jersey, for example, they had limited hours and a maybe even limited number of wagers over the course of a couple of days just to test a lot of the consumer-facing things that they may not be able to get as good of testing data on in the lab. Things such as making real money deposits, how players' responsible gaming aspects work in the wild.
Geolocation also, presumably.
Geolocation, that's going to be a huge one. That would be, I guess, a bit difficult to replicate in the lab.
What are the borders of Pennsylvania? Because I know that there was a big thing with New Jersey as well, that it was quite hard, just from a physical perspective, to identify whether somebody was in the state, just because, people do live a few blocks to the next state kind of thing. It's not a clearly segmented kind of borderline. So it makes it hard to geolocate and say, yes, this person is in state boundaries.
That area of the country is pretty densely populated. So, for example, Pennsylvania does border New Jersey. So there's going to be competing geolocations near that border, but it's also, right there with New York. And I think, or at least from our perspective, my perspective, I haven't seen many problems being reported with geolocation recently. And there's been a story that came out recently about geolocation problem that happened early on when New Jersey first opened, but nothing that has been publicized as of late. The other thing to consider, and I'm not sure exactly how this plays into the complexity of the geolocation, but the shape of the state, for example. So New Jersey is pretty irregular, where Pennsylvania is much more rectangular.
Yeah, it's not your classic Ohio square box, though, is it? We need one of those guys to come online. That should be
yeah, something like New Mexico, or no, what's the middle states over around Nevada, Utah, Colorado. I think those are very squarish kind of states. But yeah, it'll be interesting.
Just to pull back a bit, so we're talking online casino and online poker, although segregated from the other regulated US states, going live in 3 months' time. Brief soft launch period. We expect 3-4 online poker operators, maybe 5-6 online casinos, something like that.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like right now. I think the important part of what you just mentioned is that it will be segregated. They are not joining the player pool with New Jersey, Nevada, Delaware. That was always the plan from the start, with Pennsylvania then looking later to join the other states. But since the reinterpretation of the Wire Act, that has been definitely put on hold. I know that there was, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, that there were plans for companies to consolidate some of their operations. So, for example, I'm of the mind that there were companies that were going to locate their gaming servers in Atlantic City, even though they would be serving Pennsylvania because they already had gaming servers there. With the reinterpretation of the Wire Act, I believe that has changed, and they have had to move all of their infrastructure within the state borders. So there's been an impact. As a result, we don't expect that they are going to be joining player pools anytime soon until that Wire Act situation is resolved.
Yeah, and the deadline there we're looking is it's June the something. 13th,
right. 14th, I think it is 14th. Yeah.
Operators have to bring their operations in line with the new DOJ interpretation. As it stands right now, WSOP is still dealing cards across state lines. We'll have to make a call, and fights are still ongoing, working their way through the courts to see if there's further clarification to this. But presumably, WSOP will shut that off if there's no further.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the start of the World Series, because I believe there are online events scheduled to happen before that June 14th date. And, are they going to allow players in New Jersey to compete for those online bracelets?
Yeah. I mean, they have said, the last press release, they did at least kind of address that this was an unknown, didn't they? They kind of said, subject to change, given, Wire Act interpretation, that kind of thing. But it's interesting to think with the Pennsylvania launch, at least from where I stand, a bit outside things, it just feels a bit more muted than when kind of New Jersey came online, which is interesting because I think it's something you tweeted this week. Pennsylvania, their population and the size of the market is expected to be larger than all other regulated US states combined. Which is it's not massive, it's not California, but it is amazing. When New Jersey came online, there was a flurry of excitement around, and I suppose it's their first chance to re-enter the US market, but there is not that kind of level of buzz and excitement as it was. And of course, New Jersey, that was a segregated market and still is for most operators, right? Like the MSIGA is a new thing in the brief history of US regulated online gaming.
Yeah, not that it plays into what you just said too much, but from a relative standpoint, when New Jersey came online, their population was twice the existing size. And now Pennsylvania is just equal to the existing size. So, New Jersey was...
Twice the size of the market at the time. Yeah.
So, and that I'm sure doesn't is not a big factor in the hype that we're talking about. But maybe it's just people have gotten used to it. I'm not sure, but I agree with you that there has been less of a buzz around Pennsylvania. It makes me think that there was, when New Jersey came on, there was hopes of a very fast proliferation across the country of online poker. I think because of the period of time from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, those hopes have been pulled in a little. And I think that there's not that same thought that this is going to be the tipping point for online poker in the U.S.
Yeah, this will be the domino effect. Yeah. So with all that said, New Jersey pretty much segregated online poker except for Caesars. We do have PokerStars in there. They've just announced a $1 million guaranteed Scoop tournament series. In a year, we will probably have a PA Scoop series of, a similar, if not larger size. Borgata and Party Poker, they're still active. They still deal cards. They still have. So we have 3 decent-ish size online poker rooms or online poker networks with 5 skins that are, competing and active in New Jersey. So we should expect to see, the same, if not more, in the more populous Pennsylvania.
Nick, I'm wondering if you got a call from WPN, the Winning Poker Network, or America's Card Room, to perhaps do some PR work for them. I know the last time that we talked, you were on the side of some irregularities. We're down to perhaps a script instead of
I came down on the wrong side of that. Pretty much before we had we'd produced the podcast, I was very clearly wrong about what I said. So if you didn't listen 2 weeks ago, very, very briefly, there was someone Twitch streaming playing Heads Up at America's Card Room, which is a US-facing but offshore online poker room on WPN, which is an online poker network. And he was playing Heads Up in an MTT, and his opponent basically repeatedly folded with 6 seconds left on his clock. Very much looked like a bot. Knowing nothing about it, but deciding to rapidly form an opinion, I suggested maybe it wasn't in fact a bot. Maybe it was just somebody with like a sit-back-in script. Soon after I said this, I actually got a PM from somebody on 2+2 saying, very much like your podcast, blah, blah. However, it's very clearly a bot because of X, Y, and Z. And I think before I'd even read this PM, WPN has actually taken action and banned this account for running a bot and redistributed funds to players.
Yeah, so it was very, very public, the exposure of the play of this account. And because it did, somebody, the first place, winner of that tournament ended up, that they were streaming it live on Twitch. So it definitely got out there into the public. And as a result of that, WPN, America's Card Room, has responded. Phil Nagy, who is the CEO over there, went and he made a video. If you have not seen that video, you can go over to F5 Poker. It is on the site there, and you can take a listen and see what he had to say. I watched the video. Nick, did you get to see it?
No, I haven't watched it.
Yeah, it struck me in a couple of ways. So first of all, what he had said is that they intend to be as transparent as possible. They're going to be actively pursuing the elimination of bots on their network. And when they find them, they are going to out them publicly. They are going to refund players. They're going to tell players how much all players have been refunded and how they reached those calculations. So that's pretty aggressive from their point of view.
Yeah, so maybe listen to the podcast, because we said this 2 weeks ago. We said all sides could do so much more in terms of transparency when it comes to this issue. Because we got into this conversation 2 weeks ago, last episode, because we weren't specifically talking about WPN. You added that onto the end. We were talking mostly about, was it Party Poker And bots, yes, because Party Poker announced
right.
the closure of 300 bot accounts. Right. And we talked about that and talked about how this is the first time really Party Poker talked about it, how that's a good thing, but they need to do more. There needs to be more transparency. And then WPN have come out with something which, to be fair, no other operator has. They have a page on their website. You can go in. They promise to update it whenever they ban a bot. Then you can click on that bot and it will say how much money was confiscated, who's received redistributed funds. If they played in MTTs, you can click and see a list of all the MTTs they played and how much they won and how it's been redistributed to players. I actually saw they are running, there is a questionnaire at the moment where they are asking players what's the fairest way to redistribute funds, whether they should use the ICM of their chip stack, or maybe some of percentage should be held in a free roll for people who were affected, all this. So they definitely seem to be kind of doing everything that they can. So that's fantastic. In fact, since the Fox account was banned, $176,000 was confiscated from that account, by the way. So we are talking, pretty big numbers. They've since banned another account, also a Latvian account. So I'm not sure if it was related, run by the same person, or perhaps started up when the other one was banned. But that another 25,000 was confiscated from that account and redistributed to. So in total, about 5,000 players have received refunds from these two accounts.
If I recall correctly, part of the justification that I've heard from other sites not disclosing this information has to do with privacy rules in Europe. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so very much PokerStars has stated this in the past. They said that they would, paraphrasing very much here, but saying that they would like to say more. Ultimately, if PokerStars bans an account, the people affected do get an email saying, we've detected somebody who's cheated or broken terms and conditions in your account. You'll find X amount for this, but they won't say anymore. They won't say. I don't believe they won't say in which games. They won't say which account was banned. They certainly won't say other people who've been reimbursed. So, and they've said that that's due to either privacy or data protection rules. I'm not sure. I'm certainly not knowledgeable enough to say whether that's a legitimate reason. I suppose I can buy it. Obviously, I can also buy that WPN is not going to be following the same kinds of rules licensed in, I think, Curacao. And not really paying too much attention to, say, EU GDPR laws or anything like that they might not consider this a particular issue for them. And
just to be clear to listeners, WPN, America's Card Room, they consider themselves unregulated.
Right.
So this is not similar to a publicly traded company like Party Poker.
Well, you say unregulated. I mean, they will have a gaming license in an office.
Right, and I use that term because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Phil Nagy actually said that during his video.
Right. Okay.
He referred to them as being unregulated, but I could be mistaken. But it's been a while since I watched it. But I thought that is how he referred to his poker room.
Okay, so so this is all very good. Very much encourage such activity. If WM feel they can do this, maybe other operators can't go to this level of transparency, but it's a great step forward. The cynic in me says that this came about because there was an exceptionally blatant Twitch live streamed video goes viral case where if you had any protocols in place at all, this should have been detected without 1,000 eyeballs pointing and staring at it. I'm going to read out a quote to you, Mike, and ask you where it came from. Quote, right. I will make mistakes. I will ban real money people. I will ban real people because they seem like bots. I will be merciless about it. There could be collateral. There could be collateral damage on a war on bots. Who do you think said that and when?
I do remember that. I do remember that. That had to be Phil Nagy again.
As far
as the date, I don't know.
That was Phil Nagy in 2016. When somebody, also an exceptionally high-profile case, somebody started a thread on the 2+2 poker forums, Confessions of a Botter, when he described the ease that he operated a bot on the Winning Poker Network on America's Card Room. And that was Phil's response, again, done through video live stream about how they were going to be the hardest network to operate a bot on. They will crack down so much that some innocent people might get hurt in the flying shrapnel that will be a huge sweeping crackdown.
And that's the part that really jogged my memory when you said collateral damage. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. That was what was going to happen. Obviously, that has not come to pass. I mean, one just needs to look back to recent history to see how, like Joey Ingram went and just had full-on attack on America's Card Room WPN for the level of bots that have appeared on that.
And that was March 2018. So over a year ago, Joe Ingram did one of his deep dive videos into the blatant use of bots. And again, these are very crude measures, much like we saw on the Twitch stream with the person folding every time his time back gone down to 6 seconds. These are not sophisticated bots. So, and at that time, I think a bot was banned. It was a PLO bot. WPN did ban it, did say that they are take these issues very seriously. So to be fair, Phil did apologize, I think, in this latest video. Am I right in saying he apologized for taking it personally and not doing more?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's the exact part that really caught my attention is, his comment about personally, he reacted from a personal standpoint, and yet he didn't elaborate on that. So I wasn't quite sure what he did that was personal and not in the company's best interest. But it's the apology, I think, from a PR standpoint, you probably should contact us, Phil. I think it could have been better there. I will say this, that he absolutely seemed sincere. I also agree with you that I think that this is a bit of playing onto what we saw happen with Party recently, and I think they're just trying to jump on that bandwagon and build on the public image of bots that's currently happening. So I guess, even though I think he's sincere, we've heard this story before. I think that this is definitely a PR opportunity for them based on what else is going on in the industry right now. But I wonder if it will have some long-lasting consequences as far as transparency goes. And maybe that was or was not their intention, but I'm wondering how that will impact other online sites.
We are definitely getting back to weekly episodes from this point on. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah. We will be very diligent in making sure that we are putting something out for all the listeners on a weekly basis going forward.
Funny little side story to close the podcast. We said right at this, when we wanted to do a podcast, we set kind of parameters of what we wanted it to be, and I said there's just two things that I want. I want like the audio quality to be at a certain level, just because I personally get quite frustrated when a podcast might just be done like over a Skype call or something that you get a lot of disconnection. So I said, we'll record both ends of the podcast. It's not going to be, amazing thing, but let's just get some base level quality and let's just be consistent. Let's just be half an hour once a week. So I think the quality thing we've mostly got down, but the consistency thing I would grade us only like maybe a C+.
Yeah, I would agree. So consistency as far as every week, we've missed like 2 of the last 3 or 2 of the last 4, something like that. So that there's definitely room for improvement there. I think the other part of the consistency has been the actual length of the pod, and while it has seemed to creep into being a little bit longer, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
No. Oh, well, I didn't even get to the funny part. So anyway, on the quality level, so I was talking to a friend who listens to this podcast, and I was saying about how we want to be quality. He goes, "Oh, no, it's good. Mike sounds really, really good on the podcast. Like he sounds like he's like on the radio, and he's done it for years." And I was like, yeah, and my friend said, yeah, his quality is so much better than yours, but obviously he's got a much better mic than you. And I was like, we have exactly the same mic.
Exactly, same color and everything. Wow. So I'm curious if other people notice any difference in quality. So beyond
it's just your voice. It's just your voice. Your voice oozes natural radio quality, Mike.
Damn,
that's what it is.
I got to do something with that because
you're in the wrong industry. That's it.
I guess. If there's any people that are representing voice models, or I don't even know what they're called, give me a call or follow me on Twitter. Hit me up at SpookyBugs.
Well, with that beautiful buttery radio voice, Mike, why don't you send us out for the week?
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Definitely look for us to be back next week. And until then, be safe.